My family called me a leech, threw me out like garbage, so I stopped paying their bills, and then I was 24 when my mother told me I was dead weight. It wasn't a conversation, it was a sentence. I just walked through the front door after working 12 hours straight at the garage, the smell of oil and sweat still clinging to my skin, and before I could take off my boots, she was already yelling. Something about Shay's engagement dinner. Something about me being a selfish parasite. I stood in the living room where I'd spent most of my life, hands still rough from tightening bolts, and listened while my mother called me a leech who sucked the life out of everyone. Across the room, my father sat motionless in his creaky recliner, staring at a point on the carpet like it owed him money. He didn't say a word, not one. Not even when my sister Shay, dressed like she hadn't lifted a dish in her life, leaned against the wall and grinned like this was a show she'd waited all week to see. My little brother Cole stood near the kitchen entrance, arms crossed, eyes hard. When Mom yelled, "Get out, Griffin. Go live like the bum you're destined to be," Cole didn't flinch. He muttered, "Don't come back," and kicked the baseboard like he was sealing the deal. That was it. No discussion. No chance to explain why I'd missed the party, because I was covering the electric bill they conveniently forgot about for the second month in a row. No space to mention that the reason Shay even had Wi-Fi to stream her wedding planning nonsense was because I'd paid for it. Again, I looked around that room, the walls stained with the echoes of fights and silence, and knew nothing I could say would matter. They'd already chosen who I was in their story. I walked to my bedroom with the mattress that bowed in the middle and the window that stuck in the summer. The same room I'd patched up when it flooded after a storm, the one I still lived in because rent anywhere else was a joke I couldn't afford to laugh at. I grabbed my duffel from under the bed and threw in a few shirts, a pair of jeans, and the jacket I'd had since high school, the one that still smelled faintly of grease and cheap detergent. My hands shook, but I moved fast. I paused for a moment at the doorway. I don't know why. Maybe I was waiting for someone to stop me, to say they didn't mean it, that I was still part of this damn house. But there was only silence and the sound of the door locking behind me. The air outside was freezing, cutting through the fabric of my jacket like needles. The porch light buzzed overhead as I walked past the mailbox we'd painted together when I was 10, back when my mother still smiled at me like I was worth something. My old Pontiac was parked under the flickering streetlight. It had a dent in the side and a dashboard that rattled if you turned too hard. I opened the door, dropped my bag onto the passenger seat, and sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me. I had exactly $160 in my bank account, a half tank of gas, and nowhere to sleep. But the silence in the car felt kinder than anything waiting behind that locked door. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but there was nothing left to squeeze out. I started the engine, pulled out of the driveway without a backward glance, and drove into the dark like I was chasing something I couldn't name. The first night, I slept in the car behind the auto shop, curled awkwardly against the door with my jacket bunched under my head. Every hour, I woke up freezing, breath fogging up the windshield, heart pounding like the door might open and someone would drag me back. But nobody came. The next day, I cleaned up in the bathroom at work, splashing water on my face and pretending the circles under my eyes weren't getting darker. Marco, the guy who managed tires and always smelled like weed and coffee, offered me his couch without asking questions. His apartment sat above a closed-down thrift store and reeked of burnt toast and dog hair, but it was warm and his mutt Samson curled up next to me like I belonged. I kept working. Every shift, every call, every engine. I didn't talk about what happened. I just tightened bolts and changed oil and smiled like nothing was bleeding under my ribs. At night, I stared at Marco's ceiling fan as it groaned overhead and wondered how long I could pretend this was temporary. The couch wasn't mine. The space wasn't mine. I needed something real. It took me a week of scouring bulletin boards and flipping through greasy classifieds before I found the place. A single-room studio in the forgotten part of Southdale. The buzzer barely worked. The hallway smelled like mildew, but the rent was just within reach. I met the landlord in the parking lot. He wore a windbreaker 3 decades too old and looked me over like he'd seen worse. "You work with your hands?" he asked. I nodded. "You'll pay on time." That was all he needed. The room was bare. A stained carpet, a tiny window that faced a dumpster, a faucet that leaked a slow, steady beat onto rusted metal. But when I dropped my duffel in the corner and sat on the floor, I felt something for the first time in days: relief. I bought a secondhand mattress for $20 and carried it 2 blocks alone because I couldn't afford delivery. I found a lamp with a dented shade and a bulb that took a minute to flicker on. I dug out an old photo I'd kept in the back of my glove box, a shot of a lakeside at dusk, and taped it to the wall. That first night in the apartment, I lay on the mattress, listening to the neighbor's TV bleed through the wall. A game show. Laughter. Cheers. Like the world was spinning somewhere far away. I didn't cry then either. I just lay there, my fingers laced across my chest, and tried not to think of meatloaf in the oven or baseball on the radio. I tried not to remember that I used to fix that house every weekend like it mattered. I tried not to remember that nobody had even asked where I was. A few weeks passed in a haze of engine oil and early mornings, the kind where you forget what day it is until someone hands you a paycheck that barely stretches beyond rent and ramen. The shop became more than a workplace. It was the one place where no one looked at me like I owed them something. I showed up before the sun and stayed until the last wrench was dropped, sleeves rolled up, fingers blackened with grease, and the sound of impact wrenches filling the silence that followed me home. Marco's couch had been a lifeline, but even kindness has an expiration date when you're crashing in someone else's life. He never said it directly, but I saw it in the small things, the way his dog started sleeping closer to him, or how he'd linger in the hallway before coming in, like needing his own space back. I didn't blame him. I'd have done the same. When I finally moved into the studio, everything I owned fit into one armful: duffel bag, toolbox, and a battered thermos I hadn't washed properly in days. The studio was rough around the edges, cracked windows, a fridge that clicked like it had a nervous tick, and walls thin enough to hear arguments from down the hall. But it was mine. The first night I lay on that mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I felt something close to pride for the first time in years. I built a rhythm: wake up before 6, drink instant coffee that tasted like burned plastic, lace up my boots, and walk the mile to the shop with my hands buried in my jacket and the wind trying to punch through the holes in my sleeves. On weekends, I hit the thrift shop for essentials: plates, a chipped mug, a ragged curtain I thumbtacked over the window. The mattress got a blanket. The sink kept leaking. I stopped caring. By month's end, I managed to scrounge enough overtime to buy a folding chair and a small microwave that smelled like every lunch I ever had in high school. I ate over the sink, mostly canned soup and dollar store spaghetti, trying not to notice how quiet the place got at night when the neighbors weren't arguing. Sometimes, I'd sit there after work, still in my uniform, just staring at the poster above my bed, the one with the lake and the faint pink sky, reminding myself that this, all of it, meant I was moving forward. Then came the text that cracked through all of that fragile peace. It was Cole, my younger brother, and for a second I thought maybe it was an apology, maybe he regretted the way things went down. But the message was sharp and short: nice job skipping out. Jenna still hasn't been paid back for the phone bill. Real classy. I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring at the screen until my vision blurred, rage boiling beneath the surface like hot oil just waiting for a spark. They knew I paid for that phone. $120 out of my own pocket, handed over after Jenna swore she'd pay me back in a week. She never did. I covered their groceries, the heating bill, the Wi-Fi they used to stream and scroll and pretend like they had it all together. And now I was the one who walked away? I almost replied, almost let the dam break with everything I'd held back since that night. The receipts, the hours, the things I fixed without asking for thanks. But I didn't, because it wouldn't change anything. They weren't looking for truth. They were building a version of me that made them feel better about themselves. I dropped the phone onto the blanket, let it vibrate against the springs, and stared at the ceiling until it got dark. The days blended into each other, the same clanking of metal and chatter of the shop. I kept my head down, avoided social media, and tried not to think about meatloaf or birthdays or the way my father used to nod after I patched the fence and say, "Good work, kid," like that was enough to keep me in line. It wasn't anymore. One Sunday, With the shop closed and the rain tapping the roof like a slow leak, I brewed coffee and opened my banking app out of habit. I wasn't expecting much, maybe enough for groceries and rent, but something didn't add up. My balance was lower than it should have been. Way lower. I scrolled through the transactions, each swipe pulling the floor from under me. That's when I saw it. An auto payment labeled DH Auto Finance, drafted every month for $170. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen that name in years. DH stood for Dalton Harper, the loan company Dad used when he couldn't qualify for a new truck on his own. I was 20 when he asked for help. Said it would only be for a few months until work picked up. I co-signed. Set up the auto pay from my account to help him out, just for now. He never mentioned it again. I forgot it was even running. And I'd never stopped. I stared at the numbers, the dates, the pattern. For years, I had been paying for my father's truck, while sleeping on couches, while being thrown out of the house, while eating canned ravioli out of a pot because I didn't own a bowl. I put the phone down like it was radioactive and sat still, letting that truth sink its claws in. I walked to the bank before I could second-guess myself, fingers numb even though the day was warm. The teller was a woman with a name tag that read Debbie and a gentle sort of pity in her voice when I said I needed to cancel an auto payment. She asked if I was sure, adjusting her glasses as if maybe she'd heard me wrong. I nodded once. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm done. The walk back felt longer somehow, like I was dragging the past behind me one brick at a time. I passed the old gas station where I used to buy Gatorade for Dad on hot days. The one where he'd stand beside his precious truck and polish it like it was the last good thing in his life. I could see him in my head, standing there with a rag and a beer, nodding to me like he earned it. What happens now? I thought. What if the truck gets repossessed? What if the payments stop and he can't figure out why? What if they think I did it out of spite? But I didn't. I did it because it was never mine to carry. None of it was. That night, I cleaned my place just to keep my hands moving. I folded the one towel I owned, straightened the lamp, wiped down the microwave. The fridge hummed in the corner like it was holding its breath. I looked at the poster on the wall, the lake and the sky, and asked myself if Dad ever knew I was paying, or if he just assumed the payments handled themselves like magic. I didn't laugh, but I almost did. It wasn't funny, but it was something close, something sharp and hollow and bitter. I had given them so much, years of quiet sacrifices, and they still saw me as a disappointment the second I stopped being useful. Cutting off the payment wasn't revenge. It was a line in the dirt. It was me saying that I existed beyond what I could give them. It was the smallest rebellion, and it felt like breathing for the first time in months. 2 days after I canceled the truck payment, my phone rang while I was elbow deep in the engine of a 20-year-old Dodge with a misfiring cylinder and a customer who insisted it only needed a little tweak. The name on the screen hit me like a slap. Derek, my father, someone who hadn't dialed my number since the day I left without dinner or dignity. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than I should have, then wiped my hands on a rag and answered, stepping outside into the bitter air swirling with engine fumes. He didn't say hello. No, how are you? Or, is now a good time? Just launched straight into it like I'd stolen something from him in the middle of the night. Griffin, why the hell was my truck repossessed? He barked, voice cracked like an old transmission. I leaned against the dumpster behind the shop, keeping my tone as calm as I could, even though my insides felt like they were rattling loose. Because I stopped paying for it, I said simply, watching a stray plastic bag dance in the wind. I've been covering that loan since I was 20. You told me it was temporary. You never brought it up again. You never even thanked me. There was a pause, a stretch of silence, so long I could hear a dog barking on his end, muffled and distant, probably that mutt from next door that used to dig up Mom's garden. When he spoke again, his voice had lost that sharp edge, but it was still coated in disbelief. You can't just stop, Griffin. That truck's mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You kicked me out. You called me a leech. I owe you nothing anymore. He started sputtering, tripping over his words like he was trying to build a case he hadn't prepared for. That's not how family works. We don't just walk away from each other like this. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd to hear him say that after months of silence, after they threw me out like spoiled food and never looked back. Funny, I said, eyes fixed on a cracked tile near the dumpster. Because it sure felt like you did. He tried one more time, his voice quieter now, more bewildered than angry. You're making this harder than it has to be, son. That word, son, hit me like a bag of bricks. Not because I missed it, but because it felt fake now, like a costume he only pulled out when it suited the story. I checked the time on my phone. The shift was almost over, and I still had a carburetor to finish adjusting. I have to go, I said, not cruel, just final. He started to speak again, but I hung up before he could twist the knife with guilt I refused to carry anymore. Later that evening, as I was locking up the shop and walking home, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marla, my mother, the woman who once made grilled cheese for me when I was too sick for school, the same one who slammed the door in my face without blinking. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button, before tapping it and bringing the phone to my ear. Her voice came through the line like static, strained and brittle. How could you do this to us, Griffin? That truck was everything to your father. You've torn this family apart. I kept walking, boots scraping the sidewalk, passing dim storefronts and blinking traffic lights that cast yellow and red shadows across the wet pavement. I let her speak because I wanted to hear just how far she'd go to rewrite the story. You abandoned us, she continued, her breath hitching like she might cry. You're selfish, and now your father's lost the only thing that gave him purpose. How do you live with that? In the background, I could hear Shay's voice, sharp and smug, like she was throwing in her 2 cents just for the show. Tell him what a disgrace he is, Mom. I couldn't make out the words exactly, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, performative. Cole was there too. I didn't hear him, but I knew. He always hovered at the edge, never the first to speak, but quick to nod when someone else led the charge. I stopped walking and leaned against the side of the corner store where I sometimes bought milk and stale donuts. The neon sign buzzed above me, casting a sick green hue on the concrete. I kept my voice steady, like I was talking to a stranger at the register. I paid for that truck for years, Mom. For the Wi-Fi, for the heat, for food. I did all of it without complaint, and you never once said thank you. You looked me in the face and called me a parasite. So no, I'm not going to apologize for drawing the line. She was quiet for a long beat. I could hear a chair scrape across the floor, the kind of pause that made me think she'd sit down and cry again, like it was all just happening to her. Then came the soft, manipulative edge she always used when she wanted to pull me back in. We're still your family, Griffin. You don't just give up on that. We're supposed to stick together. I looked across the street at the window of my building, faintly glowing behind a crooked blind. I thought of the motorcycle waiting in the garage, half rebuilt, and the table I fixed with a clamp and some wood glue just to eat dinner without everything tilting. That was family to me now, what I was building on my own, not what I was dragged down by. You didn't see me, Mom, I said, softer than I intended. I was right there all those years, and none of you saw me. She didn't respond. She couldn't. I ended the call before she found the words, buzzed into the building, and let the door click shut behind me like a lock on a vault. I stood in my room for a moment, breathing hard, chest tight, then dropped onto the mattress like gravity had doubled. The lamp next to me cast a wide, warm glow against the wall, flickering slightly like it couldn't make up its mind. I could hear the neighbor's TV again, some cooking show with fake laughter and clinking glasses. I reached for a soda from the fridge, held the cold can against my forehead, and stared at the poster with the lake and the pink sky. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper. The weight of cutting the final chord. The ache of choosing myself after years of being told I didn't matter. They wanted me to feel ashamed, to run back and ask for forgiveness like I'd broken something sacred. But I didn't. I just felt hollow and free at the same time. Like standing up after being pinned down so long, your muscles forget how to move. Tomorrow, I'd head back to the shop, tighten bolts, wipe grease from my palms, and keep building something that belonged only to me. It wasn't much, but it was real, and it was mine. I was sweeping up the back bay of the garage on a slow afternoon when my phone buzzed hard in my pocket, The kind of vibration that feels like it carries bad news before you even check the screen. I left the broom leaning against the wall, wiped my hands on my jeans, and pulled out the phone, expecting maybe a payment reminder or some junk text about payday loans. Instead, it was a message from Nico, one of the guys I worked with, and all it said was, "Dude, look at this," followed by a screenshot. I tapped it open and stared at a post I didn't know existed until that moment. There was a photo of Marla, sitting at the kitchen table I used to eat at, her eyes red and swollen, a box of tissues nearby like she'd been posed by a director who knew how to frame heartbreak. The caption above the photo was written by Shay, in that familiar biting tone of hers. "This is what happens when your brother walks out on the family. Left mom like this. Some people just don't care." My stomach twisted, heat rising behind my eyes, not because of the image, but because I already knew how the comments would look before I read a single one. Strangers throwing stones. People who'd never met me, never seen the way I used to hand over paychecks so we wouldn't lose power, now calling me things like ungrateful, selfish, a sorry excuse for a son. I scrolled through the replies even though I shouldn't have, each one sharper than the last, each lie about me digging deeper than I thought possible. Some woman commented, "His poor mom. I hope she gets support from someone who actually cares." Another chimed in with a crying emoji and the word monster, like this was some kind of soap opera and I was the villain written in bold ink. I didn't write back. I didn't hit reply or send a private message demanding she take it down or tell the truth. My hands were shaking too much to type, and even if they weren't, I already knew it wouldn't change anything. People don't want nuance. They want a clean villain and a victim, and Shay gave them both in one tidy frame. The worst part was that they believed it. That maybe even Cole believed it, or at least chose to stay quiet while the story played out the way Shay wanted it to. There was no mention of how I'd been the one fixing that damn house for years, patching drywall, sealing drafts, unclogging pipes before anyone noticed there was even a problem. No one wrote about the bills I paid, about the food I put in the fridge when Dad's hours got cut, and nobody else stepped up. I dropped the phone on the desk in the tool room and stepped outside for air, even though it was humid and thick with exhaust. The parking lot was empty except for a stray cat darting behind the dumpster and the low hum of the neon sign buzzing in the shop window. I sat on the curb with my elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on my chest, a weight that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with being erased. Was that photo real? Had Marla actually been crying? Or had Shay waited until her eyes watered from allergies or a yawn and snapped the picture with just the right lighting? Either way, it didn't matter. The internet had swallowed the narrative whole, and now I was just another cautionary tale about cold-hearted sons and broken mothers. Back inside, I tried to focus on work, but my hands weren't steady enough for anything precise. Bo noticed right away and asked if I was okay. I shrugged and said, "Rough day," which was easier than explaining the gut punch of being slandered by your own blood in a public forum. He didn't press. He just nodded and offered me half a sandwich he hadn't finished. I took it, chewed without tasting, and kept my head down. After closing, I headed around back to the storage lot where I kept the beat-up Kawasaki I'd picked up for next to nothing from a guy who just wanted it off his trailer. It was rusted to hell, the seat torn, and the engine coughed worse than a pack-a-day smoker. But it was mine. It didn't lie. It didn't pretend to love me while gutting me behind my back. It just sat there, honest and broken, waiting for someone to rebuild it. I grabbed my tools and got to work, pulling off the carburetor, scraping rust from the frame, replacing a cracked hose with something I'd salvaged from the junk pile last week. The world faded away under the weight of the wrench in my hand, the sound of metal clicking and snapping into place, a kind of therapy I never knew I needed. The shop radio was playing a slow country song about heartbreak and highways, the kind of song that makes you feel like someone's reading your thoughts out loud. I worked until the sun dropped behind the tree line, bleeding orange and purple into the sky, my hands black with grease and my arms sore from holding myself together all damn day. Standing there, looking at that half-assembled bike, I felt something shift. Not anger, not grief, just a quiet clarity that told me I didn't need their approval anymore. That even if the whole world thought I was the villain in someone else's script, I knew the truth, and more importantly, I was the one still standing. I locked up the back gate and walked home under streetlights that blinked like tired eyes, passing the same corner store with its buzzing sign and the same clerk who always nodded like we shared a secret. He looked at me as I grabbed a soda from the fridge and said, "You look like you've been carrying the world, son." I gave him a half smile and replied, "Just a piece of it." Back at the apartment, I dropped onto the mattress, kicked off my boots, and cracked open the soda. The TV next door was playing a sitcom laugh track that didn't quite line up with the jokes, but I barely heard it. My focus was on the glowing poster above my bed. The lake, the quiet sky, the stillness I craved more than anything else. I didn't open my phone again that night. Let the post sit there. Let the world keep guessing. I was tired of defending myself to people who had already decided what kind of man I was. Let them talk. Let them lie. I had grease under my nails, a wrench in my hand, and a bike that didn't need anything from me but time and truth. That was more than I ever got from them. I lay there in the warm lamplight, the hum of the fridge blending with my heartbeat, and made a quiet vow that no matter how loud they got, I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't break. I was building something now, not just machines, but myself, and they didn't get to tear that down again. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd tighten bolts. I'd laugh at Bo's bad jokes and share sandwiches and keep turning the wrench on that bike until it roared like something alive. One bolt at a time, one breath at a time, I'd keep going forward, even if I had to leave them behind to do it. The phone call came on a Monday, sometime after sunset, just as I was wiping the last bit of oil from my fingers and listening to the sound of the shop gate rolling shut behind me. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it instantly because it hadn't lit up my screen since the day I'd left the house with a bag and nowhere to go. I stood there in the break room, surrounded by the faint smell of burned coffee and rubber, and I answered it with more steadiness than I thought I'd ever have again. "Why the hell was my truck repossessed, Griffin?" Those were the first words out of Derek's mouth, not a greeting or a question about whether I was still alive or had found a place to sleep. Just pure fury, the kind that sounds practiced, like he'd been building it up for weeks before finally letting it go. I leaned against the vending machine, the quiet hum of it grounding me, and said it as plainly as I could without giving him the satisfaction of anger. "Because I stopped paying for it," I told him, the words tasting more like relief than guilt. "I paid for that truck for almost 4 years, and you never once asked how I could afford it. You just let it ride. Let it pull money from my account while you washed it like a shrine every Sunday and never said a word." He didn't know what to say to that, not right away at least. I could hear him breathing, heavy and uneven, maybe pacing around the kitchen like he used to when bills were due and the excuses started flying. "You can't just do that," he finally said, louder now. "That truck was mine, not yours to mess with." And maybe that was the moment where the final thread snapped for me. Not when he denied what I'd done, but when he said it was never mine to touch, even though I had bank statements proving otherwise. "Then maybe," I said, holding my voice steady even as my hands clenched tighter, "you should have paid for it yourself instead of expecting your son to keep doing it after you threw him out like garbage." That shut him up, at least for a moment, long enough for me to picture him standing by that fridge I once fixed for him, mouth open, unsure of whether to yell or apologize. "That's not how families work, Griffin," he said, voice shaking now, either from anger or something else he didn't want to admit. "We don't just cut each other off over a damn payment." I almost laughed, but it stuck in my throat, bitter and sharp like a swallowed nail. "You're right," I said. "We cut each other off when it's convenient. You did it the second I stopped being useful." He tried again, but I'd already checked out of the conversation. I told him I had to go, that I had things to do, and before he could spit more guilt into my ear, I ended the call and let the silence settle like dust. That night, I didn't think much would follow. But of course I was wrong. The next call came the next evening, just as I was locking up again, the sky bleeding into dark behind the power lines. This time it was Marla, and I didn't even need to see her name to know what it would be about. Her voice hit me before I could even greet her, filled with tremble and guilt like she was practicing some tear-soaked performance for a courtroom. How could you do this to us, Griffin? She started, and I didn't even try to stop her. That truck was the only thing your father had left that made him feel like he still mattered. You've humiliated him, made us look like fools, and for what? Just to prove a point. I kept walking, one hand in my pocket, the other holding the phone to my ear like it was burning through my skin. I didn't do it to prove a point, Mom. I did it because I was done paying for people who only saw me as a wallet with a heartbeat. She tried again, her tone softening, the kind of soft that always came before she'd twist the knife just a little deeper. We're your family, Griffin. Families have to stick together, even when it's hard. You don't get to just walk away from that. I stopped at the corner store, leaned against the brick wall beneath the buzzing neon light, and let the silence sit for a few seconds before answering. You told me to get out. You locked the door behind me. You made the choice, not me. I could hear Shay in the background, saying something smug, probably coaching Mom on what line to deliver next. Cole was quieter, but I could tell he was there. He always was, silent and complicit. You broke this family, Marla finally said, her voice cracking just enough to make me think she believed it. No, I said, stepping off the wall and continuing my walk home. I just stopped carrying it by myself. When I got back to the apartment, I didn't even bother turning on the TV or checking my phone. I sat on the mattress, cracked open a soda, and stared at the poster with the lake and sky, and realized something had shifted so completely I couldn't even recognize the weight I used to carry. They didn't want a son. They wanted someone to bleed for them quietly and never ask for more than scraps. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Months passed, and I didn't hear much else. Dad texted me once with a half apology buried beneath a demand to talk soon. I ignored it. Marco told me Shay's post didn't destroy me like she hoped it would. People forgot. Internet drama fades fast unless you feed it. I stopped feeding it. Work became my constant. Bo, Nico, and Pete stopped being just coworkers. They became the people who showed up, who listened without demanding a performance. We grilled out back on slow Fridays and made jokes that had nothing to do with where we came from. I saved up enough for a second-hand table, fixed up the bike until the engine purred like something born again, and started riding it down rural roads on weekends just to feel something like flight. One night, as I was watching headlights pass beneath my window, I thought about Cole, the one who stayed quiet through it all. Pete said he saw him at the deli once, standing still like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I didn't follow up. Some silences deserve to be kept. My studio was still small, the table still wobbled, and the fridge still rattled when it ran too long, but it was mine. There was a cactus on the table I hadn't killed yet. I took that as a win. The sink no longer leaked. I had real food in the cabinets. Some nights, I even let myself feel proud. And when I thought about everything I left behind, the house, the screaming, the years of quiet labor, I didn't ache the same way. The pain was still there, but duller now, like a scar I could touch without flinching. They still told their version of the story, I'm sure, with me as the villain who walked away. But I didn't need to argue anymore. I had my own story now, and I liked the way it sounded. To anyone out there who's carrying too much and feels like you're the only one breaking under it, please hear this. You are not selfish for walking away from people who only take. You are not a failure because they couldn't see your worth. Love isn't measured in what you sacrifice to earn it. Sometimes, love is knowing when to let go. I don't know what comes next. Maybe I'll rebuild another bike. Maybe I'll finally fix that crooked drawer. Maybe I'll find someone who looks at me like I'm whole. But whatever happens, I know this much now. My story belongs to me. And that's more than they ever gave me.